everyone, and welcome back to BrickCats. As always, if you drop a like or subscribe, I greatly appreciate it. Your support means more great mock reviews in the future. Today I'm going to feature the Y-Wing Starfighter designed by Jerac and available on BrickVault. It's a great model as specified, it's really impressive on display, it's reasonably swishable, and I'll tell you how you can make it even better. As always, I'll give you my opinions on aesthetics, any parts issues you should look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and a conclusion. On this one, the parts in the build experience sections are going to blend together a little bit more than usual, just because of one specific issue I have with it. If you're watching this video, I assume you've watched the BrickVault review, bought the instructions, or are interested in buying the instructions, and I also assume you have basic knowledge of BrickLink's ordering system. Finally, my disclaimer on this and all my mock reviews is that I only use genuine LEGO bricks. I always purchase the instructions for myself, and I do this for personal enjoyment and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. With that, let's take a look. Also, I just want to take a moment and recognize how awesome the Battle of Scarif was in Rogue One. While searching for video clips for this review, I realized that the Battle of Scarif probably has the most Y-Wing scenes in any Star Wars movie. I don't think any of the new movies, including the prequels, can compare with the original trilogy, but I'm pretty sure the Battle of Scarif is probably the best space battle outside of the original trilogy. Jerac's Y-Wing looks incredible. It's almost like it's ready to fly off the stand. The Y-Wing is a relatively big starfighter in the Star Wars universe, and I think the size allowed Jerac to layer on the details and really make every square inch visually interesting. Some of my house guests have mistaken this for a Kenner model when they first see it on my shelf, although it's sitting with a bunch of other Lego models, so I'm not really sure why they would think that, and I'm also not sure if that's a compliment, but that just goes to show that it's impressive from a distance, and it just gets better when you get up close. The greebling is layered in to such a crazy degree that I'm pretty sure some of the layers get covered up by others as you build the fuselage. At the very least, some of the parts you put on in the early stages are really hard to see when you're done. There's great use of bar connections, the large hose piece in the center section, handcuffs, ingots, binoculars, clips, and amalgams of shapes that are somehow random yet orderly at the same time. As a result, this model has a visual depth unmatched in pretty much any model that I know of. The dominant feature of the Y-Wing, of course, is the two large engines on either side, and Jarac's rendition of the engines is very impressive. The cockpit section is also packed with details, starting with the ion cannons on top, the tapering shape as it moves towards the rear, and a targeting computer. Jerac even paid attention to the underside, which also has just enough detail to be interesting without going overboard on a part that you usually won't see. The ship comes with landing gear that is reasonably solid, and the rear landing pads tuck nicely into the engine cowlings. And as a side note, if you've watched my other videos, you know that I struggle with landing gear. For some reason, I always fail really hard at this. The astromech droid, if you choose to include one, loads from the bottom. The droid does not stud in, but it's more than secure enough. The yellow stripe around the cockpit is also very well done. This was the first of the 4 Alliance fighters that I built, and with the advantage of hindsight, I'm a little surprised there isn't more color variation, signifying a weathered look or maybe battle damage. This would be reasonably easy to add in yourself with some light tan, maybe some dark tan, or even some additional sand blue in certain places. I feel like this would be even more appropriate on the Y-Wing, as even at the time of the Battle of Yavin, these were older fighters. I really like the detailing on the front section of the engines. And this is actually a really bad thing to have on your desk because you can just spend many, many minutes looking at it and it never gets old. So overall, it doesn't really get better than this. I think this is the best looking of all the Rebel fighters, and for the amount of detail packed into a reasonably small package, I think this is probably one of the best looking MOCs available. For parts, there are a few things you might want to consider. First, I bought my instructions in June of 2020. On July 31st, 2020, Bricklink changed the part number of the minifigure utensil lipstick with white handle pattern from 93094C02 to 93094PB02. Thus, if you've got an older version of the parts XML file, you might get a validation error when trying to upload the XML to your wanted list. If you change the offending line to the new part number, you'll be good to go. I found the minifigure utensil tool screwdriver in flat silver, part 11402A, to be cheaper if you buy the entire pack, which is part 11402. This is not a guarantee, so make sure you check your carts when you check out. Parts list specifies the parts for the R5D4 astromech droid. If you already have an astromech droid, and odds are you have an R2D2 lying around if you've been collecting Star Wars for any amount of time, then you can probably delete 553PX1A, 30361PX1, and 30362. For the 2x2 spoked wheel with pinhole, part 30155, light bluish gray is very expensive, so I recommend substituting light gray. It's at the very back of the ship and you're not going to see the color difference. For part 14769PB025, the light bluish gray tile round 2x2 with a Star Wars TIE Fighter pattern, this is also relatively expensive. You could omit it entirely and substitute part 14769 in light bluish gray, as these are hard to see on the finished model. Similarly, part 4150PX19, the round 2x2 with Star Wars radial machinery pattern, is also fairly expensive. This one is a little harder to leave out because it's more visible at the top of the rear section of the fighter, but if price is an issue, then a light or dark bluish gray part 4150 or 14769 will work fine. Note that the only difference between the two is that 14769 has a bottom stud holder, whereas 4150 does not. Either one will work, and you'll likely get better results if you substitute just one part number for these three tiles. The 6.6 length bar with stop ring, part 4095. Jerac specifies black, but if you want an engine glow look, you might want to consider going with red or yellow. Also, you should confirm with your seller that you are getting part 4095, which is 6.6L, and not part 63965, which is only 6L. They look very similar, and some sellers understandably bunch them all together. Part 33291, the light bluish gray plate, round 1x1 with flower edge 4 knob. This is rather expensive and not very common, and it's also purely for decoration. Substituting a plain 1x1 rounded plate in light bluish gray might save you a Bricklink store or two, and knock a few dollars off the final bill. The Technic Connector 16L, part 2637, is uncommon and expensive in light bluish gray. Light gray will work fine, but as we'll see later, I can help you avoid these altogether. Part 24308A, the wheel cover 10 spoke, goes on the very rear of the ship, and I found these to be cheaper in a pack, part 24308, than buying them individually. It's definitely worth comparing buying them individually with buying a pack. There are a fair number of hidden parts, and it would have been nice if these were indicated in blue or some other off color to help you determine if you can use your existing inventory or not. Unfortunately, an extensive list is beyond the amount of time I can devote to these videos at this point, but if you go through the instructions, it should be reasonably obvious for a moderately experienced mock builder to see what you can substitute color-wise. For the exterior, in general you want to maintain the color schemes specified, but light gray will work in most cases as a replacement for light bluish gray if you have pieces in that color already or if they're significantly cheaper. Putting this model together is pretty straightforward. There are a lot of parts, but the instructions are good, and there weren't any areas where I had trouble following the steps. You really get a sense building the middle section, which is the lion's share of the instructions, at how many layers of greebling there actually are in this model. Light bluish gray is predominant, so sorting by color and or element type is pretty handy, especially for the parts in the highest quantity that you use over and over again. The only part I didn't enjoy as much as the rest of the model were the engine thrust directors. It's by far the most fragile part of the model, even though the way Jerac connected the Technic links is really cool. I also imagine this is one of the most difficult parts of the model to design. Due to recurring problems with stability, I rebuilt the engine assembly pretty significantly. The first thing I did was to make the four support pylons on each engine one solid unit anchored at 2 points. This only takes the addition of 8 32034 Technic axles and pin connectors, angled number 2, 180 degrees, which the specified Technic axles fit into without problems. Next, I used part 32062 Technic axle 2 notched with the 6538 Technic axle connector 2L for the main engine struts, capped off with 8 32013 axle pin and connector angled number 1. That's 11 numbers to say in a very short time, but basically you just make a long rod with the Technic connectors and axles. As a bonus, you can also give the support struts a little bit more length, as I think 16L is a little too short, and the original proportions seemed a little bit off to me. And lastly, for the thrust directors, I basically turned the design inside out. Instead of placing the 1x1 round plate with open stud, part 85861, as shown in the directions, I reversed the connection and then used 24201 curved 2x1 inverted slopes instead. Using the inverted slopes and reversing the orientation of the round plates means that the connection uses both the stud and the bar section of the claw pieces to secure it. It's much more secure than the original, and making the entire pylon structure more rigid makes the model a lot more robust. I want to make it clear that the engine section as specified in the directions and the parts list, without modification, both looks great and it does work. I just found it to be a little too fragile for my taste. Without the engine mod I just described, you're going to want to handle the engine sections pretty carefully. On mine, the Technic links didn't stay on reliably, which prompted the whole redesign, specifically the connection between the support strut and the thrust director. The 16L Technic links also sagged over time, and the connections on the 2x1 curved slopes just aren't very strong. The cockpit is also a bit of a weak spot, as the bricks that support the hinges float a little bit, so you tend to pull them out if you try and raise and lower the windscreen. There's a fair amount of resistance in the hinge pieces. The landing gear, especially the front skid, is a little delicate, but it's not too bad. The R2 unit sits very snugly, and the greebling in the middle section is very solid. The construction of the model is very solid, and it weighs in just under 2 pounds. It's a big model, but it's reasonably swishable, as long as you hold it in the right places. There's no stand included with this model, which is highly unfortunate, because like most ships, it just doesn't look right sitting on its landing gear. Luckily, and I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, there's a perfect place to insert the Technic axle from Jerac's X-Wing stands right at the center of gravity, as long as you remove the four semicircular tiles to reveal the Technic hole. I modified Jerac's X-Wing stand to be a bit more stable just because the Y-Wing is so much bigger, and it worked like a charm. Just recently, I replaced that with a UCS-style stand that can tilt to the side, which I think works great. Building a custom stand also allowed me to give it some more height so it fit better on my display shelf. In conclusion, I think this is definitely the best looking Y-Wing you can currently build. At least I haven't seen one that I think looks better. As specified, it is a good model, and I think the modifications maintain the overall look and give the engine construction some much needed rigidity. If you're only going to put this on a shelf, the specified parts schedule will look great and be shelf stable. My modifications replace the somewhat uncommon 16L Technic connectors with common parts, and also makes maintaining the light bluish gray exterior a little more economical. As specified, on December 8th, 2020, using only North American stores, the cost of this model was $300.41 with 8 stores, which is likely going to be around $330 to $350 when you include shipping. With 243 unique elements and 1,669 parts, this is a little expensive as measured by price per part. However, if you make all the substitutions I described in the part section, and decide to do the engine modification, the piece count increases to 1,820, but I was able to get the price down to around 150 US dollars in 7 stores. So with shipping, you're likely able to get this for under $200. If you're looking for a UCS style Y-wing, you're not going to find any better than that. And speaking of the UCS Y-wing, here's Jerac's model next to set 10134 from 2004. While 10134 and the newer UCS set certainly have whatever value you attach to official sets, I definitely think Jerac's looks much better. Instructions for Jerac's Y-wing are available from BrickVault, and I'll leave a link in the description. As always, I very much appreciate you taking the time to watch my review of Jerac's Y-wing Starfighter. If you've built this model, have something to share that I left out, or have a question I didn't cover, please leave them below in the comments. Also consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, or following me on Instagram. I hope to see you back next time.